Night in Tennessee does not fall gently, it presses down, turning every field into a shadow and every shadow into something that watches back. The dirt roads vanish into the dark, the trees lean in close, and the only light comes from a few scattered cabins where candles struggle against the weight of the evening. In one of those cramped wooden rooms, voices begin to rise, soft, low, and careful, as if each word might be overheard by the wrong ears and cost someone everything they have left. What sounds like a simple song, a harmless hymn whispered into the night, is in fact something else entirely, a quiet rebellion, a secret language, and for some, the only chance to live long enough to see another sunrise in a different land. If you are interested in the hidden truth behind songs you thought you knew, and the real cost of every whispered note, make sure you subscribe to the channel before we continue. In Tennessee, in the year 1850, the law was not just written on paper. It was written on human bodies. It lived in the marks carved by whips, in the iron around wrists and ankles, in the bills of sale that turned people into property with a stroke of a pen. Plantations stretched out across the land like open-air prisons, where the day began before the sun and ended long after it disappeared. The air carried the sounds of work, hoes hitting soil, wagons creaking under weight, overseers shouting orders that could not be ignored. At any moment, a misstep, a delayed response, even an expression on the wrong face could draw punishment so brutal that others would remember it for years. Here, in this place, freedom was not just forbidden. It was unthinkable. The state of Tennessee sat in a dangerous tension, close enough to whispers of abolition to feel threatened by them, yet deep enough in the system of slavery that every rumor of escape felt like an attack on the very order of things. Laws tightened around enslaved people like a rope pulled slowly at the neck. Patrols roamed the roads at night, on the lookout for anyone who dared to travel without permission. Rewards were offered for those who captured runaways, turning human desperation into a business opportunity. For the enslaved, the message was clear: there is nowhere you can go that we will not try to drag you back from. On these plantations, daily life was built around control. Those in power controlled food, work, movement, even marriage and family. Children could be sold away from their parents with no warning. A mother could watch her son march off in chains because someone else decided it was time. Men were forced to stand by while their wives were abused, silenced by the knowledge that any attempt to intervene would bring down punishment that might kill them both. Each person knew that their body did not belong to them, that their grief did not matter, that their hope was something others had decided they were not allowed to have. But hope is not so easily erased. Even when it cannot be spoken openly, it finds other ways to survive. In Tennessee in 1850, hope often found its way into sound. Songs rose from the fields, from the cabins, from the long walks to and from the work sites. To those watching from the outside, these songs looked harmless. Enslaved people singing about God, heaven, patience, endurance. What could be more acceptable? The owners believed that these hymns were proof that their slaves had accepted their fate, turned their eyes to the next world, and let go of any dreams of escaping this one. They were wrong. To understand what was really happening, it helps to know what Negro spirituals were supposed to be, and what they secretly became. These songs were born out of a collision between African musical traditions and the Christianity forced upon enslaved people by their captors. The rhythms, call-and-response patterns, and layered meanings came from African cultures that had long used music as a way to remember, teach, and communicate. The biblical stories and church language came from the white world that tried to reshape their minds as well as their bodies. Out of that violent collision came something new. Songs that could please the master and strengthen the slave at the same time. On the surface, these spirituals spoke of suffering and salvation, of sorrow on earth and peace in heaven. They told stories of Moses and the Israelites, of crossing the Red Sea, of leaving behind bondage in Egypt. For the enslaved who sang them, these stories did not feel distant or symbolic. They felt like a mirror. Pharaoh was not just an ancient ruler, he was the man on the horse with the whip. Egypt was not just a far-off land, it was the plantation, the state, the entire system that kept them chained. When they sang about a God who freed an oppressed people, they were not only imagining another world. They were quietly insisting that this one could not be the final answer. Over time, spirituals became more than expressions of faith. They became vessels for memory, for shared grief, and, most dangerously, for information. Certain words took on double meanings. Home could mean heaven in the official, church-approved sense. But among those who understood, home might also mean the North, a free state, or even a specific safe location known only to a few. Jordan could be a river in the Bible, or a coded reference to a real river that needed to be crossed on the way to escape. A chariot might be a symbol of divine rescue, or it could hint at a wagon, a person, or a moment when it was finally time to go. Creating and using this hidden language was not just inventive, it was dangerous. Speaking directly about escape was nearly impossible. Any word that hinted at running, leaving, or reaching freedom could be used as evidence of planning a rebellion or trying to flee. Whoever was caught having that conversation could be beaten, sold, or killed. So instead of clear speech, those who still dreamed of freedom wove their plans into music. When enslaved people gathered to sing, it was one of the few times when sound was expected from them, when their voices were allowed to rise without immediate suspicion. That gave them a tiny window, a sliver of space in which to hide something the masters would never be meant to hear clearly. Within this hidden system, each song became a kind of message, and each lyric a potential clue. Words about crossing over could be taken at face value by those in charge, who thought it was only about death and heaven. But for those in the know, it might mean crossing a river or reaching a border. Lines about chains falling did not need to be metaphors when your wrists were actually bruised and scarred. Talk of trouble in the water might be a warning about patrols, hounds, or a dangerous route that was no longer safe. This layering of meanings allowed people to speak about their circumstances while pretending they were doing nothing more than praising God. One of the most striking examples of this double life in song is found in spirituals that refer to water. A line like "wade in the water" sounds simple to anyone who has not lived under the constant threat of pursuit. It suggests baptism, cleansing, and spiritual rebirth, all ideas that plantation owners were comfortable hearing. It reassured them that their slaves were thinking about religion rather than resistance. But to those planning escape, that same line could be a practical instruction: stay in streams or creeks as much as possible, because water can mask the scent from tracking dogs. It might also hint at a specific body of water everyone knew they had to reach and follow north. The brilliance of this system lay in its ordinary disguise. Imagine an enslaved man in Tennessee in 1850, standing in a field with dozens of others at the end of a punishing day. An overseer watches from a short distance away, relaxed enough to let his guard down, confident that fatigue has broken any remaining will to resist. When someone begins to sing a familiar spiritual, the overseer hears exactly what he expects: a weary voice calling on God, accepting hardship, dreaming about heaven. He might even feel satisfied, thinking that the song proves these people have accepted their place. But down the line, another man hears the same song and notices that one verse has come earlier than usual, or that a particular line has been repeated an extra time. To him, that means the plan has changed, or the time is near. Nowhere was this more critical than on plantations where escape attempts had already been punished. In such places, even humming the wrong tune could draw suspicion. Owners and overseers did sometimes notice patterns, especially if a song appeared around the same time as a disappearance. When that happened, the consequences fell on everyone, not just on the one who had run. Whippings were delivered publicly, bodies mutilated in front of others as a warning, families torn apart to teach a lesson. In response, those who continued to use songs as code had to become even more careful, even more subtle. A message might be spread over days, through different phrases, raised only slightly in volume or shifted into a different key as a sign. The song "Follow the Drinking Gourd" is one of the clearest examples of how detailed and practical these coded spirituals could become. On the surface, the lyrics speak of a drinking gourd, which any listener might assume is just a biblical or poetic image. But to those who needed the information, the Drinking Gourd was the Big Dipper, the constellation that points directly to the North Star, Polaris, the fixed point in the night sky that never moves and always shows the way north. The song does not stop there. It gives specific, step-by-step directions for escaping from Alabama northward through Tennessee and beyond. When the sun comes back and the first quail calls refer to springtime, the season when escape was most feasible because the nights were not as cold and the rivers were not frozen. The riverbank makes a very good road following the Tombigbee River, which runs north from Mobile, Alabama. Dead trees will show you the waypoints to markings left along the route, possibly carvings or natural signs that only those who had been taught would recognize. Left foot, peg foot, traveling on is believed to reference a conductor on the Underground Railroad named Peg Leg Joe, possibly a white or mixed-race man who traveled from plantation to plantation as an itinerant worker, teaching this song to enslaved people and marking trees along escape routes. The river ends between two hills. There's another river on the other side that refers to the point where the Tombigbee meets the Tennessee River, and then later where the Tennessee meets the Ohio River, the true boundary between slave states and free states. The old man waiting to carry you to freedom likely refers to an Underground Railroad conductor waiting on the northern side of the Ohio River, ready to guide escapees the rest of the way to safety in the northern states or Canada. This was not vague symbolism. This was a map, encoded in melody, passed from mouth to mouth, memorized by people who could not read or write but who understood that their survival depended on remembering every word exactly. If you sang this song in front of an overseer, he might smile and think you were singing about heaven, about God's provision, about finding your way to the Lord. He would never imagine you were learning the exact route from Alabama to freedom, mile by mile, river by river, star by star. Another spiritual, swing low, sweet chariot, operated in a similar way. The chariot coming to carry someone home was understood by owners as a reference to death and the soul's journey to heaven. But among the enslaved, the chariot was often a code word for the Underground Railroad itself, or for a specific conductor like Harriet Tubman, who was sometimes called Moses. The song could function as a signal that someone was coming to help, that plans were in motion, or that it was time to prepare. If Harriet Tubman or another conductor was in the area, they might sing this song at a distance to let hidden fugitives know it was safe to emerge from the woods or that danger had passed. The line "I looked over Jordan and what I see, coming to carry me home, a band of angels coming after me" refers not to angels in the sky, but to a group of people, often disguised, moving through the night to help someone escape. The repetition of the phrase "coming to carry me home" was not just emotional emphasis. It was reassurance, a promise that help was real and on the way. "Steal Away to Jesus" is another spiritual that carried hidden instructions. On the surface, it is a song about retreating into prayer, about finding solace in faith when the world is too hard to bear. But the phrase "steal away" was a direct command: leave quietly, slip into the night, disappear before anyone notices. The song was sometimes sung as a signal that a planned escape would happen that very night. The line "I ain't got long to stay here" was not about death being near. It was about time running out, about a narrow window of opportunity closing fast. Those who heard it sung in a certain way, at a certain hour, knew it was time to move. "Green trees are bending, poor sinner stands a trembling" might refer to a specific landmark, a place where trees grew thick enough to offer cover, or it might be a warning that someone nearby was afraid, that the plan was at risk, that caution was needed. "Go Down Moses" is perhaps the most famous of all coded spirituals, and its message was anything but subtle to those who understood. The song retells the story of Moses confronting Pharaoh and demanding that he let the Israelites go. But in the context of Tennessee in 1850, Moses was not a distant biblical figure. Moses was Harriet Tubman. Moses was any conductor who returned to the South again and again to lead people out. Pharaoh was the slaveholder, the overseer, the entire system of bondage. When the song commanded "Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go," it was not just a retelling of Scripture. It was a call for liberation in the present tense, a refusal to accept that slavery was permanent or divinely ordained. Singing this song was dangerous precisely because its meaning was so transparent to anyone listening with the right ears. Some plantation owners banned it outright, sensing that it carried a defiant edge that other hymns did not. That very fact proved the song's power. It was too close to the truth to be ignored. Wade in the Water, already mentioned briefly, deserves deeper attention because of how widely it was used and how precise its instructions were. The full lyrics repeat the command to wade in the water over and over, hammering the message home. God's gonna trouble the water is often interpreted as a reference to divine intervention, but in practical terms, it likely meant that the water would be disturbed by your movement, and that was acceptable because it was better than leaving tracks on dry land. The song also includes the line "If you get there before I do, tell all my friends I'm coming too," which carried emotional weight for those preparing to escape. It acknowledged that not everyone would make it. Some might be caught. Some might die. But those who succeeded were asked to remember the ones still trapped, to send word back, to keep the network alive. This was not just a survival manual. It was a promise between people who shared suffering and refused to let each other be forgotten. The spiritual Michael Row the Boat Ashore has often been sung as a cheerful, rhythmic song in modern settings, but its original context was far darker. Michael could be the Archangel Michael, a warrior figure from the Bible, but it could also be a code name for a person, a guide, or a boat operator who ferried people across rivers at night. The repeated refrain "row the boat ashore" was a literal instruction: get to the other side of the river, cross the boundary between slavery and freedom. The song's rhythm itself mimicked the steady, relentless motion of rowing, a reminder that escape required endurance, not just speed. Hallelujah was not celebration. It was determination, a refusal to stop until the far shore was reached. In Tennessee, where the Tennessee River and the Cumberland River both served as natural highways for escape, songs like this helped people remember their geography without ever naming a place outright. These songs were not taught in formal lessons. They spread organically, carried by word of mouth, adjusted as they traveled, shaped by the needs of each new group that learned them. A spiritual that worked in Alabama might be altered slightly in Tennessee to reflect different rivers, different landmarks, different dangers. The flexibility of the code was part of its strength. It could not be pinned down by authorities because it was never written in one official form. It lived in the voices of the people, and it changed with them. But this also meant that mistakes were possible. A person who learned a song in one place might not fully understand its meaning in another. A verse that signaled safety in one region might mean danger in another. Those who carried the code had to constantly interpret and reinterpret, weighing every word, every pause, every shift in tone. This was not passive singing. It was active strategizing, done under the constant threat of discovery. The consequences of that discovery could be immediate and brutal. Historical records from Tennessee and surrounding states are filled with accounts of enslaved people being punished for attempting to flee. While these records rarely mention songs directly, the context makes it clear that any form of communication related to escape was treated as a serious crime. A man caught trying to run might be whipped until his back was unrecognizable. A woman suspected of helping others plan an escape might be sold away from her children as punishment. In some cases, people were made examples of, their suffering put on display to terrify anyone else who might be thinking of trying the same thing. The overseers and owners understood that fear was their most effective tool. They did not need to catch every person planning an escape. They only needed to make the cost of being caught so high that most would never try. Yet people still tried. In Tennessee in 1850, the Underground Railroad was active, though it operated in secrecy and under constant threat. Conductors, both black and white, risked their own lives to guide escapees northward. Safe houses, often called stations, were scattered along the routes, hidden in plain sight. These were homes, barns, churches, or businesses where a fugitive might find food, rest, or a place to hide until the next leg of the journey. The spirituals helped connect these scattered points. A song might tell someone where to go next, who to trust, or when to move. Without written maps or clear instructions, the songs became the thread that held the network together. They were sung in fields, in cabins, on riverbanks, and in the hidden spaces between one danger and the next. They were sung by people who did not know if they would live to see the freedom they sang about, but who sang anyway because the alternative was silence, and silence meant surrender. The psychological warfare embedded in this system cannot be overstated. Every time someone sang a coded spiritual in the presence of an overseer or a slaveholder, they were engaging in an act of resistance that required extraordinary control. They had to keep their voices steady, their faces calm, their bodies relaxed. They could not flinch when the most important line was sung. They could not glance at the person who needed to hear it most. Any sign of tension, any flicker of eye contact, any break in the rhythm could raise suspicion. The masters believed they were in control because they held the whips, the guns, the legal system. But in those moments, when a song was being sung and a message was being passed, the enslaved were proving that control was never absolute. The masters did not even realize they were losing it. That is the truly chilling part of this story. The slave owners heard these songs every day. They heard them from the fields, from the cabins, from the people they claimed to own. Some owners even took pride in the singing, believing it was evidence of contentment, of spiritual devotion, of a population that had accepted its place. They would stand on their porches, listen to the melodies drifting across the land, and feel reassured. Meanwhile, the very songs they were hearing were quietly undermining everything they believed they had built. Plans were being made. Routes were being memorized. People were preparing to disappear. After the end of slavery, these songs did not vanish. They were carried forward by the generations that followed, passed down through churches, schools, and families. But as they moved further from the original context, the coded meanings began to fade. By the time spirituals were being performed in concert halls and recorded on albums, most listeners had no idea that the songs they were hearing once contained life or death instructions. The music was celebrated for its beauty, its emotional depth, its historical significance. And all of that is true. But something was also lost. The strategic brilliance, the courage, the sheer audacity of singing escape plans in front of the people who would kill you for trying to escape. That part of the story was often left out. The spirituals became symbols of suffering and faith, but not always symbols of resistance and intelligence. Today, you can hear these songs in churches across America. You can hear them in movies, in documentaries, in school programs about Black history. They are sung by choirs who have trained for years, by soloists with powerful voices, by children learning about their heritage. And that is important. These songs deserve to be remembered, to be honored, to be kept alive. But when they are sung now, how many people in the audience know that Wade in the Water was not just about baptism? How many realize that Follow the Drinking Gourd was a map? How many understand that Swing Low, Sweet Chariot was a signal that help was on the way? The loss of this knowledge is not just a historical footnote. It is a form of forgetting that diminishes the people who created these songs, who risked everything to use them, who trusted that future generations would remember not just what they suffered, but what they did in response to that suffering. In Tennessee, on the very land where these songs were once sung with hidden meanings, people walk today without knowing what happened beneath their feet. The fields are still there. The rivers still flow. The trees still bend in the wind. But the code is silent now, buried under time, under new construction, under the comfortable distance that lets us believe the past is safely behind us. It is not. The past lives in these songs, waiting for anyone willing to listen with the kind of attention that the enslaved had to use every single day of their lives. Once you hear the code, you cannot unhear it. Once you understand what these spirituals really were, you cannot go back to thinking of them as simple hymns. They were maps. They were warnings. They were promises. They were acts of rebellion carried out in plain sight, in front of people who never suspected that the voices they heard were plotting freedom. The scariest part of this story is not that the slave owners were cruel. Cruelty is easy to recognize and condemn. The scariest part is that they were confident. They believed they had won. They believed the people they enslaved had given up. They stood in their parlors and on their porches, listening to songs about rivers and chariots and journeys, and they heard nothing but submission. They never imagined that those same songs were teaching people how to leave, where to go, and who to trust. That is the true horror, the idea that you can listen to someone's voice every day and never really hear them at all. If this story has changed the way you hear these songs, if it has made you realize how much history is hidden in plain sight, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you never miss another untold truth. Hit the like button if this opened your eyes to something you did not know before. Leave a comment and tell me which coded spirit surprised you the most, or if you have heard these songs your whole life without knowing what they really meant. And share this video with someone who needs to understand that history is not just about what was done to people, but about what people did to survive, resist, and reclaim their own voices. The code may be hidden, but it is still there, waiting to be heard.